Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good following morning. This is AMA number 76 with Sam Konig. I am Jonathan with my co-host, Rabbi Avi Baumol. Today is December 2nd, 2021. Hit it, Avi.
Shalom from Krakow, Poland. Today is Kaf Chet Kislev, the 28th day of Kislev, and more significantly, about to be, I guess already, the fifth night of Hanukkah, 5,782 years since the creation of the world. So welcome, everyone.
Welcome to everyone. Welcome to everyone. Good to see you, Avi. You're here with the family. How's that going?
Good to be here with the family. A little complicated getting out of the country in Israel with shaking things up with the Omicron and everything like that, but we're here and we're enjoying. So that's a good sign. And it's Hanukkah. Hey, some Jews say this is their favorite holiday of the year.
I believe it is definitely one of the popular ones. Anna Zomer, Anna Schneider, hi, shalom from Washington. Ryan, hello from the Basin, and Saul Schachter, hello from mild weather New York. Yeah, I heard it was in the 50s today in New York. That's what we like to hear.
How are you doing on the latkes scale, Jonathan? How many have you had? Are you in the Sufganiya department?
I have had no. So I have had, let's see, I have zero. Okay. I've had zero sufganiyot. Okay. Normal for me. But I have had at the Shabbat dinner, I had 2 latkes. No, not Shabbat dinner. Sunday night dinner, I had 2 latkes. And then we went to dinner and I had 1.5. I've had 3.5 latkes.
Not bad, not bad. I didn't get the chance to have a proper jelly donut in Krakow. The pickings just slim. However, before I got here, I decided to have a pre-Hanukkah little snack there, and it was quite enjoyable.
Was that a Roladine snack?
It was pat b'melach, which is our Efrat version of a Sufganiya treat. It's amazing what they're putting on the top of these donuts these days.
Okay,
they're like these artistic.
Yeah, they starts to look like it's like a wedding cake on a donut.
Yeah, there are lines. There's one place in Yerushalayim. There's a line around the block. It's called Kadosh, and it's supposedly the best sufganiya in Jerusalem. So.
Oh no, Anna Zomer is saying that she had 5 ponchki on the first day. Yeah, 5 on the first day. That's what we like. Agnieszka, what are our favorite latke toppings? My favorite latke topping is no topping, but I don't mind a little bit of like the mushroom sauce, but I don't like applesauce, a little sweet, and I don't really do the sour cream. You, Avi?
I disagree with you wholeheartedly. I'm an applesauce guy, especially the applesauce that Kasha made for the Sunday night dinner. It was fantastic. It really offsets the oiliness of the latke. It was perfect.
Avi, I will say this about you, that if there's ever 2 food options, and one of them is the more like sweeter, more child friendly, what a 9-year-old would like, then that will always be your choice.
100%. And you know what? There's something to be said about having a palate of a 9-year-old. All right, 9-year-old kids were very, very happy. 50-year-old men, not so happy. So you do the math.
Listen, I'm not saying I have a sophisticated palate. I have the opposite. The only time I ever feel like I have a sophisticated palate is when I'm around you.
Well, you have a sophisticated pizza palate.
I have a sophisticated pizza palate. That is probably the only food that I can speak with any authority. Pizza and ice cream.
Fair enough.
So we're getting some information here. Randy says sour cream belongs on blintzes, not on latkes. Applesauce on latkes. Very American of you, Randy. We in Poland like our sour cream on the latkes. Saul Schachter, hi, was on a Princess Bahama cruise the first night of Hanukkah with Captain Stubing and Lauren Tuis. Sunday, and I went to services aboard, and I ended up leading the services for the 2 other Jews and me. Fun time. Wow, on the cruise. We like that. Saul on the cruise. Very impressive.
Very nice. And you've lit the candles also brightly on your window?
I've been lighting away with my beautiful Hanukkah given to us, I believe, as a wedding present by the Baumols. Is that true?
Yes, it is.
My
Yes.
beautiful orange Hanukkah, which we love very, very much, and we always we use it as we have for the last, I don't know, 4 years.
Yes. Hadley picked it out. She said, "This belongs in their house."
So Avi, tomorrow you have a birthday coming up, which means a very special, we have Sfirat Omer and we have all these days, the 9 days and the this days, and Israel, the whole Jewish calendar is some complicated mesh of this amount of days in between this and based on that. But coming up are my favorite 31 days of the year, which is in between December 3rd and January 3rd. You and I, my friend, are the same age.
That is correct. And we're taking a poll as to who looks younger. Feel free in the comments to chime in. We won't be offended. I just got a haircut.
I know I won't be offended.
Well, we both feel young. That's what's important.
We do. We do. Obviously, I was in Berlin recently, which is very exciting. A few things, some notable things going on there. I went for a meeting with my friend Tova Dorfman, who is the vice chair of the World Zionist Organization and in charge also of the Holocaust portfolio. And she is working with Colette Avital and with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs there in Israel to have Holocaust Survivor Day acknowledged as an official day by the state of Israel.
Amazing.
Which is a really, I have to say, pretty cool thing. So, which I'm incredibly proud of. And I think all of us should be proud of that. Been involved.
What was it like
that.
being in Berlin? There's some basketball teams.
I've been to Berlin many times. So it was interesting. There was an event. She was there because Maccabi Tel Aviv was there playing the team Alba Berlin. And it's funny. I think there are more Israeli born players on the Berlin team than there are in Maccabi, which was very strange. In other words, David Blatt's son plays on Berlin. So it was very, very interesting in that sense. So went there for the game, and then Maccabi signed the actually proclamation about anti-Semitism, the definition of anti-Semitism that Maccabi signed, and we had a ceremony with the leaders of Maccabi at the Berlin Holocaust Memorial, and so it was about that. The game went there. So there were people that accompanied, part of this official delegation with Maccabi, which was very nice. So got to talk. Shimon Mizrahi was there and talked to Tal Brody and Doron Jamchi and all the good and the great from Maccabi.
This is the nobility.
So that was a lot of fun. I will tell you, it was there. The German ambassador was there, and it's a lot of interesting people. But what was really, I think, reminded me about Germany, which was that. I feel, and I don't want to offend anybody German or anything, but I think I've said it before, and just being honest, I don't think I could live in Germany. I'm pretty sure I couldn't live in Germany. And people are like, oh, because of the Holocaust and stuff. I'm like, no, like that I can get past just because of the way that things are now. And I don't mean anti-Semitism. I just mean this sort of rigid mentality, which is very much the opposite of my worldview. We were going into the game, and we had one of the bags, a plastic bag with like Israeli flags, a small plastic bag given to us by the embassy for us to give out as part of this official delegation. And then one of the women with us had a bag, not a big giant bag, like a small pocketbook bag. So they came up to us, they had this measuring thing, and they said, oh, I'm sorry, this bag is too big. Now, meanwhile, it was a flexible bag, right? It wasn't a hard bag. So you can kind of say, oh, the bag is too big, but it kind of folds up. No, and yelling at us and being very aggressive that we had to go and put it in this locker that they have outside. You pay them a few euros and you pick it up after the game. Okay. But they said that one bag was too small and the other one was okay. So we go, we wait online, we pay, we put this woman's bag in this locker, and then we get back in line, we go into the stadium, and we're about to go through the metal detector, and somebody else inside sees this other bag we have, and he goes, it's too big, no. And we're like, what do you mean? The supervisor outside told us, and they're yelling at us. And, I start to get irritated. So I walk in anyway. I feel like they're about to, like guns about to be drawn on me. Anyway, very, very disturbing situation. And you just see this idea of this. Not only, it wasn't like, listen, we're sorry if somebody inside sees you with the bag, I'll get in trouble. It wasn't that kind of apologetic, listen, these are the rules. It was this proud enforcement of nonsensical rules. In other words, how dare you try to bring in this bag that some could consider too big? It was this attitude toward the rules that I realized, you know what, I can't deal with it. It just brings up a lot of bad feeling and bad will in me. And I did not think I could live in Germany.
I've heard, I can't tell you how many times I've heard people ask me, how is it possible that Jews are living in Poland, but have no problem with Jews living in Germany? And I find that to be strange, to say the least, that they make that kind of contrast.
Yes, and again, let me draw the distinction in saying it's not because it's not that I walk around thinking about the Holocaust. I just walk around seeing people that are blindly following regulations and proudly, aggressively following regulations that don't make any sense, and it brings me back to a bad place memory-wise. So nothing against Germany. I think Berlin is one of the coolest, most fun cities, beautiful, fascinating places in the world. And I not that I don't forgive Germany, and that's not that it's up to me to forgive, but I don't have a problem really because of the past. I just feel like my worldview is incompatible with this rigid rule-following worldview that they have.
Yeah, I had similar, like, opposite experiences. On the one hand, I was invited to Berlin for a conference on anti-Semitism, and they wanted me to present about Poland and what it's like there and what I'm experiencing, and that was very positive. But when I left there at the airport, the type of body searching that they were doing, it was like way beyond, and I thought that they were getting some kind of thrill of searching every single part of me that it seemed too much, and it was. And my wife felt the same when she was visiting there. So I don't know. They certainly like to follow the rules there.
This wasn't the first experience that I'd had. A few times I've had the police called on me in the airport because I've been arguing. They said that something was too heavy. I took stuff out. I put it in my pocket, as one does. They said you couldn't do that. I was like, you can go on eBay or Amazon and you can buy 100 different sweaters and jackets that are specifically made for you to put your stuff in, not weigh down your suitcase. There's a whole industry of that. But they didn't like the idea that I had like a book in my bag that they said was too heavy and I stuck it in my pocket. I was like, what are you doing? You know what I mean? It's like, again, people often have, listen, these are the rules. We're sorry. We can't do anything about it. But that's not it, right? It's not that, which I can live with. It's something different.
What have you done here how has the JCC done for Hanukkah?
Well, tonight is Hanukkah, which is our big open event, which this year is subdued, obviously, because of Corona. So things a little quieter. We had a big, very nice Sunday night dinner here with the latkes, as we said, and ponchki, and that was we had. What else have we done, Avi? You've been here.
I went ice skating with Hillel last night, so that was a lot of fun.
Ice skating. That was that was last night, and then Tuesday.
Oh, and the night before we did this thing with the lights. It was actually freezing, but really
the light.
Cool.
Yeah, we went to the Garden of Light.
Yeah, it was cool.
Right, that was cool. I went there just for the beginning to see the oldies. I'm sorry, the seniors. See our beloved seniors and survivors, aka the oldies, and that was a lot of fun. So yeah, Hanukkah is a fun holiday. I think what's nice is I always remember when we're eating a meal during Hanukkah, it's one of the few times that we're eating one of these like festive meals that you can take photos. And I'm always like sneaking the photos. You turn away. I take photos during Shabbat as I do, being not in the German mentality of following rules. Me being a natural born contrarian. But Hanukkah is fun because you actually sit down, you have a meal, and you can take photos.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. The entire country in Israel, everyone's swept up in Hanukkah plans and vacations and foods. It's cool.
Avi, what is your family up to while you're here?
They are doing an immense amount of shopping. I'm just watching my credit card just pile up. They love the shopping here. Every single one of them comes and they find all these different things. They know all the stores, and they don't speak Polish, but they do speak Polish when it comes to shopping in a mall. I don't know.
I have to tell you, Avi, I just got a text a few minutes ago from a friend of ours who works in the president's office, who we both like very much. And he said, Jonathan, I'd like to officially, on behalf of Poland, I want to wish you a happy Hanukkah. And I want to thank the Baumols for supporting the Polish economy.
It's true. It's true. It's their one time where there's just no stopping them.
God bless. So, God bless.
Yeah. Listen, I'm just happy to have the whole family together, even for one day. It's harder as kids. Even my daughter, who's in the army, got some time off and is able to be with us. So thank you, Israeli Army.
There you go. Avi, let's bring in Sam Konig, who you're meeting. I don't think you know Sam, but Sam is a good friend of mine.
I met Sam.
Oh, you've met Sam. Let's bring Sam Konig. He is the Director of Development of the Northeast region for the American Friends of Bar-Ilan University. But that's really only part of his whole background. His parents are Jewish Poles who left in 1969 after the whole stuff that went on in 68 and went to Vienna, to Copenhagen, and he went to study in the UK. And he's a real fascinating example, such a super smart guy who's done it as an amazing career, generally in fundraising, first in Hillel, directing Hillel, and now more in fundraising world. But I really want to talk to him, and I'm so excited to see him. I ran into him at the World Jewish Congress dinner in New York, and I said, oh, Sam, we were talking about it and said, what a great person to have on the AMA. So welcome, Chag Sameach, Sam Konig.
Chag Sameach, thank you for having me. It's a great honor to be here this evening, this morning from New York, from Riverdale, Bronx.
From Riverdale, where Rabbi Avi grew up.
I grew up in Riverdale, Sam.
Yes, I know. You know who mentions your name all the time? Dr. Isaac Chavel.
Oh, he's a close friend.
Yes.
He's a special person.
Because when I say Poland, he looks at me and say, Rav Avi. So you have that connection. Yes.
I grew up on 239th Street and Independence Avenue. It might be very close to where you live.
Yes, we're 246. So that's 5 blocks. Yeah. Very close. I walk through the streets that you walked. So it's very, very special. Yeah.
The mean streets of Riverdale.
Yes, indeed.
So Sam, I want to talk a little bit about your background, which is to me absolutely fascinating. And being a Polish Jew in this generation of of people, not the second generation, the ones after who left Poland, and also about all the good work that you're doing these days in the Jewish world, because you have a fascinating career and it's exciting to watch each step of your career. And you just came back from Dubai, and I want to hear about that as well.
Yes, and the president sends his regards, but we'll talk about Dubai and the president of the Jewish community, Ross Creel, sends his regards back, but we'll talk about that. Yes.
Very nice. Absolutely. But let's start. So talk a little bit about your family. Where are they from? What was the background? Where in Poland were they living? What was the decision about 1968 for them leaving right after in 69? Talk a little bit about that.
Of course. So as you know, I wasn't around then. So it's based on the stories, of course, for my parents and grandparents. But on my mother's side, my grandmother was from before the war, from Stanisław, which I believe now is Ivan-Frankowska in the Ukraine, so Galicia. I believe not too far away from Krakow. And my dad and my grandfather from my maternal side came from Kolomea. Also, I believe it's 500 kilometers from Krakow. Rav Hillel of Kolomea is like a known rabbinic figure. And
my grandfather his family came from Kolomea.
Yes. Wow, that's beautiful. See, another comment.
By the way, Jonathan, he had a chocolate factory, my great-great-grandfather. So I think it's genetic.
You inherited his sweet tooth.
And my grandfather always used to say that actually the uncle of the former chief rabbi of Israel, Rav Lau, so Rav Lau Senior, so his uncle was the last chief rabbi of Kolomea. And he said it was an interesting choice because it was, there was all the different sects, right? Mizrahi, Aguda. So they couldn't find their own candidate. So they went with like the neutral. And that was Rav Lau, the uncle. So just a side story. So, I always like to share the stories that my grandfather used. I remember very clearly when I was in Vienna visiting him, we would lie next to each other and he would tell me all these stories about Kolomea, about how everything before the war was much better. Even my grandmother made a good carp, but before the war, the carp was good. So I'm not sure, but it was just everything was. So that's how the stories were told. So that was on my grandfather's side, and after the war, they, we can talk about how they survived. We can talk about that too. But after the war, the town that my uncle and my mom grew up in was Bittem, Beuthen in German. And there was a very interesting connection there too, because my parents eventually, my mom's family went to Vienna, then to Copenhagen, and once when they're in Copenhagen, my mom tells me there was a fundraising event for Hakoah, which is like Maccabi, but in Denmark. And she sat next to the late the chief rabbi at the time, Melchior, his brother. The name escapes me now, but he was a Melchior. He was a minister of traffic. And anyway, they sat next to each other.
Michael Melchior?
No, so his uncle.
Okay.
So my mother. So why am I telling you this? Because all these connections, right? So she's sitting next to this former minister, and he asks her, "So where from?" He said, "Bitom, Boyton." And he looks at her and say, "I grew up in Bitom." So why did he grow up in Bitom? Because Michael Melchior's grandfather, before he came to Copenhagen, was the rabbi of Boyton at the time when it was Germany. So again, everything is interconnected with each other. And on my dad's side, my dad's side, they were from Warsaw. Both were from Warsaw. And my grandmother actually survived the war in a monastery on Aryan papers. So when you actually look at the Chevra Kadisha, and she passed away she was buried in Copenhagen. So when you actually look at the Chevra Kadisha book, you actually see her Polish, the name that was changed. It's in there. So it's also fascinating that's how she survived, on Aryan papers with a Polish last name and everything. So that's the after. In terms of during the war, my grandmother from my mom's side, they were deported. So before 1942. So if my history is a bit, I'm not a historian, but that's how I understood it. Before 1942, before the Germans took over, so my grandmother was again from a little village called Jablonica, which is part of Ivan-Frankowskaya. I guess that was my great grandfather, was high in the police. He wasn't Jewish, so he was basically the family were taken because they were part of the Polish elite.
Sam, that's very interesting. At that point that we're talking about, to have an intermarriage at this point is very interesting, no?
It is. It's very much so. And my understanding is that the way I understood it from my grandmother, that when they got together, the two great grandparents, and my grandmother, I remember her very clearly. She said that her grandfather. Sorry, there's a lot of grandfathers, great-grandfathers. If I'm confusing, but her grandfather.
Yeah.
She remembers her grandfather explicitly saying to her father, "Do you know what your future wife is doing? What she's sacrificing for you?" And she did, because the family excommunicated her at the time, and
Wow.
she was alone, and she was with my so they were together. They married, and it's very interesting because between my grandparents there was a 16-year difference, right? 16 years. So my grandfather actually knew my grandmother's grandfather, but because there was such a big difference, and because the family no longer were communicating with each other, my grandmother didn't know her grandfather, but her future husband no. So that's, again, there's all these interconnections. So that was so basically they were deported to the Gulag. I mean, it's, as I say, they survived the Gulag. That's in itself sounds a bit, because they could have easily, not survived because of the cold and everything. But that's how. So basically, my grandmother, that's how they survived the war, and then they came back to Poland after the war.
And the other side of the family, and your father's side.
And so that's right. And my grandfather on my mother's side, he survived the war because he was in the Polish army first. And then he was in the German. He was captured by the Germans. And what he said is very interesting. I recall very clearly. He said that because he was in the Jewish unit in the Polish army, he clearly remembers that when he initially was arrested, there was no discrimination per se. There was no anti-Semitism per se. In that's early years of the war, when I think the Wehrmacht wasn't so Nazified. But again, I'm not a historian. It's just based on what I was told. That in the beginning, he didn't necessarily feel that hatred, right? He was captured because he fought for the Polish army. So maybe that because the German army was still not Nazified that way. And then he ended up fighting. He got out of the prison, and then he fought for the Russians. He actually was he was in the Battle of Stalingrad. And if we see the movie Enemy at the Gate, yeah, you see that the bullets were coming from both sides, both from the German side and Russian side. And that's how he explains to me that's how it was, that this is reality. The bullets were coming on both sides, and he didn't know he was going to get out of there. But the last few months of the war, what happened was, because he was injured, he got a bullet here. And I remember very clear, when I was little, I used to always push it because this part was soft. So I was like very intrigued by that, but he had a scar right here. And so the last few months he was in the hospital, actually, recovering from his injury. But he lost, he lost everyone. It was terrible, he survived the war in a way because he wasn't at home when his family was killed, and they weren't even deported. They were killed by local Ukrainians, taken to the forest. So it was very sad. And when he came back home, it was very hard for him because there was nothing there. There was few pictures that he was able to take. Sorry, I'm getting all emotional. My grandmother passed away this past summer in August.
I'm sorry.
So she was the last sort of part of that generation. So it's like, as I'm telling it, it's like I have no one to I have no one to talk to about it. I mean, my uncle and my mom, of course, but it's different.
Yeah.
So he said there was nobody there, and he was on his own. But there was an uncle on his mother's side, and there was an uncle on his mother's side who, after the war, he then eventually went to Israel. Then he met my grandmother. And the question always is, why did you stay in Poland, right? That's the always question, right? Because my understanding is there were sort of three exodus, right? There was in 1946 after the Celts pogrom, then there was in 1956, and then my understanding, the last sort of exodus was between 1968 and 1972. So there's always that question: why did you stay? From my grandmother's perspective, she did want in Israel at the time seemed to be the only option. That's how I understood it, and she didn't want, her kids to be in the Israeli army. And then they just got settled. They had very good friends, friends for life, both Jews and non-Jewish friends who they were very close
I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. I'm just mindful of our time, and I want to be sure.
Go ahead.
So maybe just to the other side of the family, and then
Yes.
I want to talk about your parents and how they met.
Of course.
Their experience, because I think we could spend a lot. For me, it's fascinating, but I want to make sure that we get to everything. And
Me
I know
too. You cut him off. I didn't know what was going on. Okay.
No, so on my dad's side, so they lived in Wrocław, in Breslau, right? In Wrocław, that's where they grew up. It was my dad and his sister. Again,
where did your parents meet, Sam? Where did your parents meet?
So it's a very interesting story. There's two meeting points. There's a meeting point when my mom was 7 and my dad was 14. So there was a ship in Copenhagen. So at the time, the president of the Danish Red Cross was a name by Izzy Feugl. He was originally from Germany, from Leipzig. He eventually became Minister of Finance. Anyway, it was his sort of mission to get to create to make Denmark a haven for this purpose. Let's call us political refugees. There's different narratives, but let's say political refugees. And so there was a ship. And there's actually a documentary movie about that ship. There was approximately 500 Jews who lived in that ship outside the coasts in Copenhagen. 500 of them, so both families were there. The grandmothers knew each other. My grandmother tells me that once she brought a pot to the other grandmother, but how would they know that many years later they would so that was the first time they met, right? Because my dad and my uncle were similar age. The second time, for better or for worse, we can call it a shidduch. My mother was in Vienna, my dad was in Copenhagen. My grandfather got a phone call from somebody who knew my grandfather, who knew that he had a daughter. And my father, he said, why don't they two get together? So my grandma, the way I understood it, they met each other, and on day 3, right, my dad proposed and my mom said no.
What
and
year
there's
was
always
this,
a joke.
Sam,
Sorry, that was in Copenhagen and Vienna.
What year?
So that year, 1983.
So when, back up a little bit here, because
Okay.
I didn't understand that they didn't meet in Poland. How did they leave? Talk about them leaving Poland.
How they left.
Yeah.
So again, my understanding is from my mother's side is that my grandfather already had some friends already in Vienna. So the infrastructure was already there, but the best way to get out of there was through Copenhagen, right? Because
So they left in
Copenhagen
60, but your parents independently
68.
left in 68, 69.
68, 69. That's my understanding. More 60, 68. They went, they both families went. Each family went through Copenhagen. Paternal side stayed in Copenhagen. Maternal side continued their journey to Vienna.
Yeah. And at home, your parents at home, when they were at home in Copenhagen and in Vienna, before they were together, they spoke Polish at home?
Yeah, because both set of parents were Polish. So yeah, my I would say my parents grew up, they grew up speaking Polish. When they lived in Bytom, my mom didn't go to shul, but my grandfather used to go to shul in Bytom, and he always was proud that on Yom Kippur Mincha they would give him the Haftorah, which is a big honor. So he always said that of all people they chose him at that. So that was his thing.
Wait, so your parents left, their families left in 68 because they felt that life was untenable for them in Poland?
Yeah, I mean, my understanding is that there was a lot of my dad has the story. My dad has a scar here, right here. He has a scar right here, and the reason for that is because when he was in school, when he was a little, they called him, they beat him up once and called him Żydzi, Jew, but it's in a derogatory way. And at the time he didn't even know he was Jewish, but families talk to each other, right? So he went to his mommy and said, and she's Oleg, right? So she said Oleczko, Oleczko, because in Polish you call somebody with, when you say Oleczko, it's like a little boy. So she said, Oleczko, Oleczko, what happened? So he said, they call me Żydzi, what does it mean? And that was the moment when she had to tell him that he's Jewish. So there was these kind of incidents. But on the other hand, there's also very positive interactions. As I said, my grandparents had a lot of non-Jewish Polish friends, and who they had. Again, I hear these were friends for life. They were very close very close with each other, and so this was both. They were both. But yeah,
Fascinating. What? Very interesting.
Yeah.
Sam,
I mean, there's
you were born, Sam, you were born what year? So your parents, decided to stay in Vienna, and you were born what year in Vienna?
Right. So my parents, so this is interesting, right? So again, not to confuse the situation, but I was born in Vienna, but I grew up in Copenhagen, right? So that was, my dad was there. He had a chocolate stores, again, not a chocolate factory, but chocolate stores. So that was the business. So my mother moved to be with him. So they were there from 1983. So they were in Copenhagen until I turned 18. When I was 18 years old, they decided to move to Canada. And because there was a period, a very tiny period, a year where they lived in Vienna when I was 17, 18, 19, but they moved to Canada. And because I wasn't 19 yet, I was part of the immigration. So they moved to Toronto, which is very interesting because, at the time I wouldn't say they were old, but they weren't like that. When you immigrate, my understanding is, they were comfortable in Copenhagen, right? So the fact that they chose that, made that decision, and they made that decision. And again, I'm an only child, but made that decision because of me. They wanted me to get an education in either Canada or the States. I also went to boarding school in England for 4 years. So, I'm grateful. Parents tend to be selfish, right? That's a nature, right? I'm a father, but at age 14, when I found that the Jewish community in Copenhagen was too small for me, I told my parents, I researched myself, and I found this Jewish boarding school. And I said, Mommy, Mama and Tata, I want to go to England. And they say, fine, let's do it. And I will always be grateful for them, because the education I got in England in the boarding school was really amazing, both the Jewish part and also the secular part. And it positioned me well for my career, both personally. So, yeah.
And you spoke Polish with your parents growing up?
Yes, all the time. I spoke Polish all the time. It's very interesting when in Toronto, I remember friends used to tell me that when my parents' friends used to come, they were very confused, because it felt like there was one generation behind. Because here you had a young boy like me, young boy, not 18, 19, talking to his 50-year-old mother in Polish, right? Usually it was one generation behind, right? Usually it's the 50-year-old that talks to the 80-year-old in Polish. But I was the 18-year-old, 19-year-old communicating Polish. So people found that fascinating and very authentic in that way. I mean, obviously I switched once the conversation was more heated. I felt that Polish wasn't so I switched then to the other languages, because I felt I was, it wasn't fair for me to speak in Polish. My arguments weren't coming through. But yeah.
How many languages are there?
So there, and there's also made up words too, right? So that's the language. So there's Polish, there's Danish, there's German and English, right? So there's different languages to choose from. And also, I had Polish nannies too, Pani Małgosia, Pani Zosia. So if I wanted to get fed, right, I had to speak the language, So I had Polish nannies, and again, it was fascinating, because again, I was but you know what, in Copenhagen, I would say at the time, there was a whole group of us, right, of Polish Jews in Copenhagen. So we weren't isolated. There was a community within a community, and until now, I'm in touch with those my generation, my age. And you have people that speak fluent Polish, and some people speak like me, and some people speak worse. But I'm not the only one, in the sense that there's actually a community of us, both in Sweden. There used to be a summer camp called Maccabi, and Maccabi was basically a camp for Polish Jews. We used to meet in Sweden. It was mostly Swedes and some Danes. There was a family of from Malmö and Lund, and we used to get together, and it was all, we used to sing Niech żyje nasza Kolonia, So I remember it very clearly, and it just went on and on. Nasza Kolonia.
And where did you go after your boarding school?
After boarding school, I went to Canada. I went to Montreal. I went to university there. I was there for 4 years, and then I was a youth director at a big congregation called Shar Shemaim in Montreal. So that was for a year. I was there, the youth director. And after that, I worked for Hillel then in Montreal. That's how I started my Jewish communal career. And from then I moved to Ottawa and did my master's, worked for the Jewish Federation there. And then I moved to Toronto, where I worked for Hillel Canada. And then came to the States, where I was the executive director of Hillel in Baltimore and Towson University. And then I met my wife.
That's how we met also.
Yeah, and so that's how we met, right? Because I met my wife. It was a very interesting story. I met my wife in Poland. We were both on a trip together.
Of course you did.
Yeah. Jonathan was there when the Sparks,
Right.
Yeah, at the Shabbos at the festival.
How long ago was this?
Now you're testing me. I 7 years ago. 7 years ago. Yeah. So it was. So Poland again came up. We went on a date. I remember in what's called the big park in Warsaw, Łazienki, right? Am I right? Łazienki, is that the big park in Warsaw? Łazienki. I forgot. I talked to the people from Kruke, so they don't know. But yeah, it's a big. I guess it's a big park in Warsaw. We went.
Are you going on a date in Warsaw when you can be in Krakow? I don't understand.
No, because the Krakow is where the love was found. And Warsaw is when the love was found.
So
Krakow.
Sam, you have a son.
Yes.
Will you teach him? How old is he, and will you teach him Polish?
So his name is Netanel David. He's turning 3 soon. I speak with him German, but there's some. Actually, he has a. He goes to SAR Academy, which is the Yeshiva Day School by us, and he actually has a Polish teacher. And his Polish teacher, there's 3 teachers, and one of them is Polish. And she teaches in Polish. And my dad also speaks with him Polish. And my mom also does like a Polish nursery songs. There's one called Nie Burak, Jak, something with Burak. And he actually knows it now. So it's like a Burak, right? That comes to you, right? So he does the hand movement, and it's very cute. Yeah.
Amazing.
Fascinating.
Sam, how many languages do you speak?
You missed
So
it.
I speak 4, right? I speak Polish,
4.
Danish, German, and English. My Hebrew is so I don't think it's fair to include it in the languages.
Now, Sam, you've become really quite a expert fundraiser. Whenever I'm see you in New York, you're running from this one, from this super VIP to the next one to that one. Is it natural for you to be a fundraiser? You're definitely a schmoozer. And tell me about what are the keys to being a successful fundraiser?
So I think it's about being natural and genuine, right? Because the people that you are asking for money, right? These tend to be successful business people, people that there's a reason why you're asking them for money, right? Because they have accomplished something. So they're not interested in, again, we are in the sales business, but they're not interested necessarily in they're not naive, but they're not necessarily want to meet with a salesperson. They want to meet with somebody who's genuine, who also has a story to tell, who understands where they're coming from, who knows the balance and has patience, right? Because in this line of work, it's all about patience and it's all about relationships. We are seeing some organizations now are actually switching the title from being a development officer to a relationships officer. Because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. It's all about relationships. Nobody wants to, unless you want to ask for money and then you don't want to see them again, nobody's interested in transactions. It's in the long term. That's what it's all about. And the next generation. And I think it's about patience. It's about knowing, it's about the intuition, knowing when to call somebody, right? Like before I call people, always look at the market, If the market is down, I don't call anyone, right? Because they're upset. So it's about these little things that you always have to, people ask me sometimes in interviews, what is fundraising? Is it a science or is it art? And I say it's a double major. Because yes, it is a science, because the theory is the more people you meet, the face-to-face meetings, the more people you're raising. But if you don't have the personality, if you don't have the intuition, if you don't know when to stop, when to take a step back, then the science doesn't really help. So it's important to do both.
Fair enough.
Where are you working now?
So I work for American Friends of Bar-Ilan University. I'm the director of the Northeast region. And it's a fascinating job because it's not just fundraising, but it's Israel, it's university, it's Startup Nation, it's all the amazing invention that come out of Israel. Bar-Ilan is a part of it, like many of the other Israeli hospitals and universities. And
you're supporting my daughter, so you should thank you
now
on behalf of my daughter.
Of course, my pleasure and our pleasure, of course. And the great thing about university is that it's a very broad mission, right? So it's not just curing, cancer or Alzheimer's, but it's also cybersecurity. It's working with, supporting students from the periphery, from vulnerable populations. And Bar-Ilan actually just established 10 years ago a medical school in Tzfat. So that sort of creates another add-on in terms of diversifying and being able to reach to donors that are interested in focusing on the north of Israel, but also the shared society, because 50% of the north is Arab. There's also a significant Haredi community, and the north is not as well served health-wise as the rest of Israel. So that's why there's a lot of opportunities there.
Sam, tell me, because it's interesting. As Israel, Americans very often have this idea, Israel with the oranges and this sort of poor country in the Middle East and needs to be supported by American Jews. And it's obviously a much, much more nuanced, complicated situation that you have a lot of Israelis that are fabulously wealthy. So when you're thinking, and when a university, an Israeli university like Bar-Ilan is saying, okay, we need to, raise money besides what tuition and just, government and research and all that, we need to fundraise. How much in your future, not necessarily you sitting in New York, but how much is the fundraising apparatus of Bar-Ilan and the leadership of Bar-Ilan looking toward Israel, starting to think of, wait a minute, that American Jews, of course, should support Israel and always will, but how much of that is shifting? Not only, I guess I'm asking about your specific university, but how much are you privy to and how much do you see that as part of the larger idea of Israeli universities and Israeli organizations fundraising in Israel when there's a lot of money in Israel as well, and it's not necessarily a place that people think of fundraising so much?
I mean, it's a good question. I think it's both. I do think I'm beginning to see that that's how I understand it also from the literature out there, that you have, Israeli philanthropists that are, how should I put it? Israelis that are seeing themselves as philanthropists now, because one thing is to be wealthy, another thing is to be philanthropic, right? It's two, sometimes it's two separate things. You have people that don't have money, but they're still philanthropic. So I think that Israel being a young nation, right? I think that philanthropy is becoming more part of their identity of who they are, and also, I mean, again, I don't know the Israeli tax law, so it's hard for me to say from this perspective if it's beneficiary. But I do see that a lot of families are beginning to step up and are giving significant gifts, and then you also have Israelis that live in the States and around the world who have done pretty well, and that's also a population that we can't forget, right? Because that they also care about Israel. And they're a very integral part of it, right? Because they're both, right? They live now in Jewish communities around the world, but they still have their heart and their businesses, many of them in Israel. And then you have the Jewish community, of course, which obviously, especially over COVID, you had many philanthropists. They said, we have to focus now on local, right? Because our local community needs us. And there's nothing wrong with that. Where we as Israeli universities, and many of us have done, including Bar-Ilan, is that you're giving to Bar-Ilan, yes, it's in Israel, but you're also giving to Bar-Ilan because it's the number one in a certain thing in the world, right? So for example, we just got a significant funding for a diabetes center in the north, okay? That's going to be a huge deal breaker, and it's going to do research on things that are unique right around the world.
Did you raise that money?
I didn't raise the money. No, it was before my time, but my job is now to raise the difference. Okay. Yes, that's my job now. So again, right? It's Bar-Ilan, it's Israel, but it's something unique that can contribute to around the world, because again, it deals with vulnerable population, and that formula you can use in other countries as well, in terms of curing diabetes. So I think the shift is also that Israelis are, in many things, number one in the world. So if you give to Harvard and to Cornell, you should also give to Bar-Ilan, Technion, or Weizmann. So I think that's also very important. But then we also have a job to educate the next generation of Jewish philanthropists that, like their parents and grandparents, they should also continuing supporting the state of Israel, because yes, you're right. Israel in itself is a wealthy country, and we're very proud of, every time there's an article, that Israel is number one, number two. But at the end of the day, it's a partnership, and that's where Bar-Ilan is very unique, right? Because you might not know, but Bar-Ilan was established by Americans in 1955 by the American Mizrahi movement. So it's in our DNA that relationship that exists between American Jewry and Israel.
Sam, is there a big difference? Because before this, if I remember, you were working for Hillel International, right?
Yes.
Doing major gifts in New York. Is there a difference? Talk to me a little bit. Maybe there is no difference, but if there is a difference, then talk to me a little bit about it. The difference between your job, not the intricacies of your job, but in terms of the message of fundraising for Hillel International versus for Bar-Ilan.
So there's two differences. One difference is, Hillel International does have Hillels, including Krakow and Warsaw, right? But the majority of Hillels are in North America. So the difference is, right, that in Israel, I'm raising money for abroad, right? I'm raising money for abroad. So it's not like I can say, hey, come over in an hour and you will meet with students. Obviously some of our donors, now less because of COVID, travel to Israel all the time. So we're able to piggyback on that. But in the States, it's very different, right? In the States, it's very different because they can feel it and touch it and be part of the experience. They can go to a Friday night dinner and experience it firsthand, right? Um, so I think that's where the difference is. And also my job particularly is very different because at the time I was an executive director and a fundraiser, right? Which means my job, I was able to, not that my story is now not authentic, but I'm not the one who's curing cancer, right? I'm the one who is talking about it and making the connection and doing the closure. But in Hillel, I could say I was the one who motivated the students, who gave the tools to the students so that a BDS motion was defeated. Or we gave the tools and we gave the training to the students, or we gave the experience, right? We gave them the pride in Yiddishkeit to be part of building a beautiful community of communities on campus. And I can say I am part of that, right? And that's so in the senses, at Hillel, in some cases, I was also the practitioner. And I think that was the difference.
You're telling the difference between just relaying someone else's story or telling a story that's your story as well. And do you like, Sam, I think for most things, to be good at something, you have to like it to some degree. To do it for a while, you can probably be not like something and do it well for a month. But do you like fundraising? Do you see your future in that situation? Do you prefer managing? What do you like to do?
Maybe a combination of both. But I like fundraising because you get to be out there, you get to meet with people.
You're very social, right? So for you, it's a good position. You love talking.
It's a good thing. You get to know the people, and also I'm very selected with what cause I want to fundraise for.
Right.
Not that I'm not saying that working for a hospital is not important and working for an organization that deals with vulnerable populations, but I like education. I like Jewish education, Israel, and that's what makes my job easier because I'm passionate about what I'm raising money for, right? Like you have people out there, fundraising professionals who've been very successful. Then they make the shift and then it goes downwards. Why? Because they made the shift for the wrong reasons, right? Whether it's a salary increase or whatever it is, but they're not passionate about the costs.
Yeah.
Whatever my next job is, it's important that the cause that I'm raising money for, that I'm passionate about, because again, the people that we're dealing with see through, right? If they see you're not passionate about it.
You're dealing with a sophisticated, as you said, very, very astutely earlier. You're dealing with people that most of the time are very successful, very, a lot of times made the money themselves, and you can't just BS them. And they want authenticity, and you're authentic. And I think, and it's interesting because I don't, a lot of my job is fundraising to some degree, but I don't think, I think it's a little different. I feel like I'm building relationships. I think I'm storytelling. I don't feel like it's so much about the ask. It's more about convincing people of the righteousness of what you're doing. And then that's almost the secondary discussion is, of course, you have to, you need money to do what you're doing, but it's more about getting them to believe in the idea.
And also what you're doing is you're positioning them, right? You're positioning them that they're going to eventually give, however they want to give, right? And how much and also how, right? Because some people like to be asked, some people don't like to be asked, some people like to get proposals, right? That's we, the fundraising professional, it's our job to figure out how the ask is going to happen. But you're totally right. As somebody said, it's all about positioning. That's what we do in the positioning business. We position the donor, and then and it could take half an hour, half a year. I mean, half an hour too. It could take half a year, 2 years. It can take 6 months. It can take varies. Again, we're dealing with different personalities. Different family. Everybody has a pekela. So you also have to figure out.
I think it's interesting for me and somebody in my position, on some level, being the director, people want to talk to the director, but I also very often become friendly with people, and it's like, before I ever ask them for money, I might know them for months or even years. And they're people that are often fabulously wealthy, and I staying in their homes and spending time with them socially and all this. And sometimes I think that it's sometimes it can be almost a little awkward to turn that corner and say, listen, Joe and Michelle, I've known you guys, whatever. Obviously, you're very philanthropic. We'd love you to get involved here. I think sometimes organizations would do well by having, because a separate person sort of doing that, like kind of you build a
Like closing the
relationship.
deal.
Have separate-
Yeah.
Exactly. But then again, people at a certain level also want to hear from the boss, right? It's like if I'm asking, I think if there's a $10 million ask there, it's going to be the president of Bar-Ilan making that ask.
But my job is to then prep him, prepare the people that we're going to ask for money, and sort of create that process, right? Exactly. So that's my job. Also, many times it's behind the scenes, just making sure that, as we say, the ducks, that they're all in a row, and yeah, exactly.
I feel like when I watch you, not to say watch you work, but when I spend time with you and I'm with you in different places that are, the social situations, but to be honest, you never really turn off. Your job is to be around. And if you're in a restaurant and there happen to be all these people around, then you are always aware of who's around.
Yes.
I always look, and I think for you, it's so effortless. I feel that you're such a schmoozer. You love talking to people. You love you're telling your story and hearing their stories, and you're curious. And I think that it seems to me like it's very natural for you.
Thank you so much. The one thing I want to add also, that as I'm getting older and as I'm getting more mature, so to speak, I do say that sometimes where if I'm out with my family, right, I'm trying to put an effort that because I have a crazy memory, right? I have people that I remember 10, 15 years ago, and sometimes I see them in restaurants and I know who they are, and it will be important for me to go up to them. But sometimes, again, you have to learn when is it time to turn off and turn on, and when it's time to focus. So you're right, but I'm also trying to find the balance. It's also time sometimes you have to turn off and realize that the focus now is having dinner or lunch with your family. So I'm sort of in the process now, and COVID in a way has helped, just because we just haven't been out so much.
Right.
So I think that's also something
right.
of a good fundraiser is also to take a step back and to realize, it's a 24-hour job, because if a donor wants to talk to you at 8:00, or if they're traveling and there's a time difference, you do what you have to do. But sometimes, like with any other ones, it's time for business and time for with family.
Absolutely. I find that, my board, it's nice. I'm in a nice situation where all the people, my board, are not telling me, Jonathan, work harder and do more. They're like, work-life balance, you have to relax. Are you taking time? Because they know that I'm a little bit obsessive with all of this, as I think you are. But having a baby in 2 months, I think it will, I will have to do a little bit of a better job of.
B'shah tova. This is exciting news.
So Sam, I want to wrap up with you. This has been absolutely fascinating. A couple of things. We usually ask someone if they are on Team Latka or Team Hamantash, but I wouldn't dare ask during Hanukkah if you're Team Latka or Team Hamantash. I'm going to assume that you're on Team Latka, and I'm going to ask you what your favorite topping is.
My favorite topping is it topping, or can I add an S to it? Toppings, or no? Or is it just
Whatever
one?
you want, however you like.
I like a little bit of tzibele, right? A little bit of onions. And some capers, okay, and sour cream, and some smoked salmon. Yes.
Wow, that's a good answer. I asked the right person. Excellent answer. And
I'm a foodie. We can have another talk one day about foodie.
Not with me. I'm only a foodie for two foods: pizza and ice cream. I'm like a child, but of course a little bit of an older child than Rabbi Avi, who's a little younger.
Chocolate and cereal.
Chocolate and cereal. Sam Konig, 3 favorite films of all time.
Hi. That means I have to be 3 favorite film of all time. So, I mentioned one of them, Enemy of this, just because it has a similarity with my family.
It's a good movie.
It's a good. Many of the movies I'm going to share with you are war related and Holocaust
Vasily
related.
Zaitsev. The name of the sniper in the movie is Vasily Zaitsev. Am I right?
He's a British actor, right? He's a British.
Thank you. If I had a mic, I would drop it for remembering that, but thank you very much. Vasily Zaitsev. I don't know why I remember that. I don't remember anything else about the movie except Vasily Zaitsev, and maybe Rachel Weisz is in that movie. But go ahead, Sam. That's one.
Rachel Weisz, yes. The other movie I think is again a favorite one, again because it's the story of my wife's story, The Defiance. That's a very special movie because my wife is a Bielski.
Wow,
so that's a very
Wait, we could have. Let's rewind the whole time. Bring your wife. I want to talk to her about she's a Bielski.
But that's going to be the next one.
Oh, I forgot your wife's.
You have to come back, Sam.
Sam, I wasted all this time talking to you. I should be
I
talking to
know.
the
So you have my
Elisa
wife. She will
Bielski.
talk to you. She's
Elisa
great.
Bielski.
She's amazing. So she will.
Yes.
So you can have her. I'm number what, 76. She can be your 77 or 78.
Perfect. Defiant. We have Defiance, Enemy at the Gates, and one more I need.
Okay, so now we have to have a more light, a light one. I don't know. You choose the third one for me then. A light movie.
I will choose the movie Big with Tom Hanks for you.
Okay, good. So we'll do that then. Yeah. Oh, you know, but there's now you got me started. What's the one? The Big Lebowski, right?
Big Lebowski's good.
I like that. I like when they say, I'm Shomer Shabbos. Yeah, I like that.
I believe he says I'm Shomer fucking Shabbos, but I'll let it go.
I didn't say that, but
You
yeah.
can say it on the AM. Sam Konig,
Doing the day here by us, so yeah.
Thanks, Sam.
To you and Elisa and
Great hearing from you.
Well.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this.
Take
It
care,
was
my
great.
friend.
All
See
the best.
you in
Chag
New York.
Sameach. Yeah, see you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Chag Sameach.